Well, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, the big Democratic primary is over. We're going to take a look at who won. I think we all know who won, but more importantly, why did Tom Wolf win the Democratic nomination, and then how does he stack up against Governor Corbett? We're looking at a very, very important race for governor in the state of Pennsylvania. We'll do that and more after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, the long, arduous Democratic gubernatorial primary is over, as I think everyone in the state knows, and perhaps even around the nation. Tom Wolf, the businessman from York, prevailed. Not just prevailed, he rode to a wave in the election, winning by something like 40 points, almost unimaginable. Well, joining me to assess all of that is a trio of the state's leading journalists. Steve Esack, he's from the Allentown Morning Call. That's Steve sitting right there, along with Karen Langely from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And sitting, figuratively speaking, to my right, actually it'd be to your left, would be Brad Bumsted with the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review. Welcome, all of you journalists. Say thank you, something.
Thank you.
Get in here. You're all like tired from covering this. You were everywhere, right?
I hear where you're going with this, that's all.
No, but I mean, let's face it, you guys spent, it was a wild primary, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, and it was long. I mean, it started late last year, really earlier than that. But.
Right. Well, let's start with this. I'm going to ask all of you for a big takeaway. What's your big takeaway from this?
That Tom Wolf zoomed out of right field in a Jeep to home plate at his campaign celebration, and just in that manner, he walks away from this with a lot of momentum and taking on Tom Corbett.
All right, we'll come back to some of that. How about you, Steve?
I think my biggest takeaway is the way Allison Schwartz and Rob McCord's campaigns never took off, despite both of them having several $1 million at their disposal.
And having been elected, right, to two pretty important offices. One a member of Congress, Allison Schwartz, and one a two-time elected.
That is true, but I think both of them suffered from delusions of grandeur that they were more well-known than they actually were across Pennsylvania.
Karen.
Well, we knew from the polls that Tom Wolf had a big lead in this contest, but I thought what was striking was that he won in every part of the state. He won every county. The vast majority of them with over 50% of the vote.
All right, let's start with Brad's. After 3 weeks with the first onslaught of television, Steve was keeping track of all the money. We'll come back to him on that they spent. The race was virtually over, right?
It was. And I think there are three reasons. One is $10 million that Wolf put in of his own money and loans. The second is that he was uncontested on the air for 9 weeks. And the third is he presented himself as a different type of candidate. And the fact that he didn't hold elected office, as we talked about, was a real advantage for him right now.
Talk about the money. $10 million, everybody knows about that, but you were keeping track. And
all the Democrats themselves, all four of them, including Katie McGinty, they spent over $30 million. I think it was $30.6 million. If you add in what Tom Corbett spent, like over $8 million.
Pushing 40?
Pushing $40 million. So this was the most expensive primary race in Pennsylvania history. As well as what Brad mentioned. I mean, Tom Wolf's commercials, he spent, I calculated 74% of the $12.9 million he spent, which is like, I forget what that is. I think it was like close to over $9 million on TV ads alone.
Right. All right, now if we go, well, the effect of that was pretty much what your point was, I think, Karen. The effect of that was something I've never seen, 23 years of polling. And I mean, an unknown comes literally from nowhere, and he ends up doing what?
Well, I mean, it's a big state. You can't be everywhere all the time. And if you are up on TV introducing yourselves to people across Pennsylvania, that's going to have a real big effect that it's maybe impossible to counteract if the voters like what they hear.
I think, go ahead.
Well, that's it. If they like what they hear, you have to have a message.
Yeah.
You could take Charles Manson and give him $200 million, and it wouldn't resonate with people. So it has to be a message there that people like, and they liked what they heard from Wolf. They liked his Jeep. They liked his family. They liked his resume, and they liked his pitch of being different, and they're looking for something different, apparently.
Yeah. I think Tom Wolf also tapped into the public's anger or distrust at corporate America. When he was saying the stuff about sharing profits with employees, I think that really resonated with a lot of people coming out of this recession.
Marcellus Shale as well, too.
Yeah, that was a very good commercial.
And I mean, this is a time that people are not too crazy about politicians, as we know. You know, Wolf was running against a statewide office holder, Rob McCord, against longtime member of Congress who was former in the state legislature, Allison Schwartz. On the other hand, you have Wolf, who's a businessman and academic, who did serve in Ed Rendell's cabinet, but who I don't think anybody saw as a politician beyond his campaign.
I think these are all really good points. The other one is, I mean, just to pick up on something Steve mentioned, typically you don't find as many business Democrats running, I think, as you do Republicans. That's I'm not saying it's total, one of the last governors who was, quote, not a politician was Milton Chapp, who came from a business guy as well. But that's a good point. He did turn that into an advantage, didn't he?
Well, and it could be even a bigger advantage for him in November with some Republican crossover. Look at it. It's like when Ed Rendell ran in 2002. People looked at it and said, look, this guy is not anti-business as a Democrat. And I know a lot of Republicans who wanted to vote for him. And you could run into that here, dissatisfaction with Corbett from Republicans, although that tends to be conservative. They have nowhere to go. But others will maybe take a look at Wolf because of his business background.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, let's take a look at the matchup, Tom Corbett, Tom Wolf. The campaign in the fall has already started. You get no respite from it. Or from me. We'll be back in a minute.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, here we are. We're doing a little wrap-up of the past Democratic gubernatorial primary. We're now going to look ahead. Governor Corbett against Tom Wolf with Steve Esack, Karen Langely, and Brad Bumsted. All three are journalists. They cover campaigns. They cover the state capitol. By the way, if you're watching this program on WGAL TV, I want to say that 10 o'clock we're going to air. Meet the Press has been preempted for other reasons. We're fortunate to get the 10 o'clock spot on Sunday in the Susquehanna Valley. All right, let's move ahead, Steve. The matchup, I don't think there's a doubt that Governor Corbett is viewed as the underdog going into this, given his poll numbers, given his favorable ratings, his job performance, and he's already started a fall campaign.
He has, and there is one little tidbit of the election. His lieutenant governor, Jim Cawley, actually got 26,000 plus more votes than Governor Tom Corbett in what amounts to a protest among Republicans against him. But looking forward to the fall with his matchup with Tom Wolf, I think it's going to be very challenging for the Corbett campaign to mention Tom Wolf's, I guess, lack of experience, because he's a businessman. A lot of Republicans are from the business community, so they have to probably
be careful how they manage to do that. But they've already started that. In the one commercial I saw, Brad, I think they were talking about the fact that he laid off Pennsylvanians during, I guess, the downturn that the business went through. And now it's been rebuilt. So you expect the same thing? This to be a tough, rough fall?
I do.
Fall, maybe spring and summer, right?
I do, and I think Corbett, with the money that he has, will do far more sophisticated opposition research, and who knows what they'll come up with to try to make a case against Wolf. But I think that the key factors in this, and you would know this better as a pollster, but so much of it comes down to likability. I mean, policy issues are important, but do you like this guy or do you not like him? Corbett hasn't been likable, even though in person he is likable, one-on-one, and Wolf has that's something that people like about him. So,
is there any, you cover the legislature, and you know there's big issues out there, education funding. I want to talk about the gay marriage decision that Governor Corbett made in a minute, but 3 weeks or so the legislature will have till the end of the fiscal year when they come back after the Memorial Day holiday, actually about a month, I guess. Any hope there that they do increase education spending? What are you hearing?
Well, I think that we just need to stay tuned for the next month and see what happens before the June 30th state budget deadline. Revenue numbers are not good at all. Everyone in the Capitol knows that, and so there are going to have to be some choices that will be made. Governor Corbett has proposed some new education funding for different programs.
And he reiterated that about 2 weeks ago in a Pittsburgh speech, despite the fact that the state, as you point out, has an expected $800 million to a $1.2 billion deficit. So, but would you agree about education spending?
Well, I think that those are new proposals that the governor certainly wants. The Democrats have been very successful in getting out the message of him cutting education funding, although the story is a bit complicated. It involves the federal stimulus money that dropped off when he came into office. But Corbett's going to want to defend and protect those spending increases, and he would have to find the money to do so somewhere else in the state budget.
All right, let's turn to, I think one of the big stories, Brad, was the decision the governor made this past week not to appeal the decision of a federal judge, John Jones, who in effect ruled the state's Defense of Marriage Act unconstitutional, in effect opening the door for actually the issuance of marriage certificates and legal marriages in this state, plus the state's recognizing couples that were married in other states that live here. Was that, on one level, it was unexpected because they thought, well, he'll certainly appeal it to the Third Circuit, but what's your take on that?
Well, my take on it is that Corbett's decision not to appeal was smart from a legal and a political point of view. Legally, if you look at what's happened in district courts around the country, they've all ruled the same. This is going to the U.S. Supreme Court. That's where it's going to be decided. Politically, it certainly takes away some of the undercurrent and sting about him being, quote, anti-gay, not that he necessarily is. But people who didn't like him because of his initial position still won't, but it takes away some of the noise
level
about
on the other side, maybe. The other thing Stevie did cite in his release is religious beliefs, but it seemed to me, I read the opinion, it looked like when you get into the cases, the overwhelming, as Brad points out, that you would appeal, but you weren't likely to succeed, and I think Brad's point is maybe it just takes the energy level away on that issue.
Oh, it does, and I think Governor Corbett has a lot more pressing issues, education funding. This is one issue by not appealing that he doesn't have to deal with come this election coming up, really. But let's not forget that Governor Corbett didn't cause this. This lawsuit got thrown on his lap when Kathleen Kane decided she was not going to defend it.
Right.
And the governor said, in his opinion as a lawyer, that only the courts can make such a decision on the constitutionality of the law, and he picked it up. So.
All right, when we come back, we're going to take a break here. I want to ask Karen about, Governor Corbett, there's been some shifts in some positions on some some pretty important issues to this state. We'll look, is Governor Corbett tracking to the middle, which is where most politicians go, back to the center? We'll find out in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
Final wrap up on the important governor's race. We're looking ahead. Where does all this go? Karen, one of the things that's sort of fascinating is you can sort of go through some issues where there were, in some cases, not so subtle, in other cases, subtle shifts that we've seen in Governor Corbett's positions. We just saw the gay marriage thing not to appeal. On one level, that sort of surprised people, but maybe, as Brad just pointed out, not so surprising given the legal situation that Brad described, not likely to win in court. And secondly, diffusing the political momentum that it would have brought into the election. But what about some of these other elements of the change that we've seen in Governor Corbett on these big positions?
So in just the last few weeks, we've seen several topics like this in which the governor isn't necessarily making a wholesale shift in position, but is like diffusing the fervor about some of these things. So a couple weeks ago, we saw the governor announce that he would not appeal a court decision that the state's voter ID law was unconstitutional. He didn't change his position. He said that voter ID could still be a good thing, but that the courts had identified problems with it, and said that in the future he could work with the legislature to fix that.
Translation: nothing's going to be done.
Right. Not before the election, I wouldn't think. And then on one of the other issues, there had been a push for some legalization of medical marijuana in the state, which is something that you're certainly seeing across the country and in all kinds of states
among
politically.
Pennsylvania voters.
And so Corbett announced that he would support a very limited, what he termed like a pilot study program for certain sick children.
Yeah, Brad, as you point out, there's some political gain to a lot of this without much political downside. Maybe on the gay marriage thing, he could get some blowback from conservatives and some like Roman Catholic diocese. I think in Philly there was a statement out about it, if I recall that correctly. These issues likely to help him where he is politically, do you think?
Well, I think only in the fact that you won't have several hearings perhaps in the fall on gay marriage where he'd be out taking a position against it, and protesters would be outside the courthouse and TV cameras would be. It takes that away. I think the medical marijuana thing is a good compromise politically, where he can say, look, we're just going to do this on a trial basis to see what FDA eventually says. All
right, we're going to run to a break. Final segment. We come back. I want to start with Steve. I want to ask Steve, the election ahead, what's he looking for? Is it going to get mean? No. An election in Pennsylvania would never get controversial, and we'll see in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
Final wrap up, Steve Esack campaign. Where does all this go? What are you looking for as we move ahead to deal with the Corbett-Wolf matchup? It'll be nationally watched, big election.
I think it all comes down publicly to education spending. I think Governor Corbett has spent his first 2 years in office really not trying to sell the education cuts that occurred. Some of it state money, most of it federal stimulus money, but there were state cuts within that year. I think it comes down to him trying to defend that. But also he has the lingering issue. I'm not sure if Tom Wolf will bring it up, but the entire Penn State, Jerry Sandusky, Joe Paterno fallout that obviously may have been a factor in in some of his voting numbers that occurred on Tuesday. So I think that is a big issue.
What are you looking for?
Well, some would say he's lost the T, that portion of the T already,
Because of the
Penn State, no matter what he does or what Attorney General Kane's report says. But what I'm looking for is for Corbett to take a page out of Arlen Specter's book from quite a few years ago, and that's to go after Wolf early and hard and define him before Wolf can further define himself as the nice guy in the Jeep. And whatever that is or what they're going to do, I don't know. Also comes down to, I think, the economy. Or people feel they're better off today than they were before,
What are you
as
looking
always.
for? Good point.
I want to see what moderate Republicans and typically right-leaning independents choose to do. Out at Wolf events, you meet a couple of Republicans who have switched their registration or planning to vote for Wolf in general. Of course, that's at his events, but I'd like to see how what happens more broadly with them.
So the legislative session, I'm going to end very quickly. Legislative session really matters here, maybe, what they could do to education spending, to go back to your point?
It really does matter, because a big hunk of what Governor Corbett wants to do with education money comes down to changing or reducing the state's and school districts' pension obligations. They cannot do that publicly from a public standpoint and policy standpoint without also getting some sort of changes involving 401k pension plans for future employees. Time is ticking. They didn't get it done last year. I don't know if they'll get it done this year.
I agree with you that education is really the linchpin of all of this, and I don't see under any circumstances that Corbett could agree to cut, even if money's short, they'll take it out somewhere else. But I think if he gets some sort of liquor, wine expansion, not privatization, they'll probably won't close the state stores. It'll be a boost that he could use in his commercials. But whether he gets it, who knows?
So when as we view this legislative session, you all agree that it is incredibly important. The one thing that strikes me just politically is how can they cut in this environment? I mean, cutting programs now would be politically.
I think there's a lot of potential downsides in June. There's not too many upsides besides avoiding those.
Because of the budget deficit?
Yeah, there's not enough money for what they need to do, barring some kind of big changes that are difficult to get through the legislature.
50 seconds, go ahead.
And the severance tax on natural gas companies, they're moderate Republicans want it. Senator Pileggi's been quoted as saying it's inevitable. Governor Corbett is still opposed to it. So if he gets that, then that could take care of some of the deficit as well as the education funding.
Yeah, conceivably they could put that in the education spending. All right, thanks for the great update. And as always, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and stay well.